Well, good morning everyone, and welcome to the Network Collective's latest webinar on the topic of is now the right time to buy hosted telephony. So my name is John Waterhouse and I'm CEO of the Network Collective, and I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. As I'm sure everyone joining knows, TNC is the UK's largest independent telecom strategy and sourcing consultancy, supporting over 240 major UK and multinational companies to get the best commercial, technical, operational and contractual results from their network and telecoms solutions. So that's enough about us. Joining me today is our CTO, Craig Northveth. Craig, would you like to say hello to our listeners?
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us today, John.
Right, well before we get stuck into the meat of the webinar, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. So we're going to be very strict on sticking to the 20-minute timetable today. Everybody attending will get a copy of the slides after the webinar, and we will try to respond to any questions we receive during the webinar at the end, but any we don't have time to answer, we will respond to on email afterwards. Right, so all that said, if we move on to the first of our slides. So as we say, the purpose of today's webinar is to put the whole topic of hosted voice under the microscope. So as everyone on the webinar will know, there's a lot of talk in the market today about hosted voice, and not least because it aligns with the wider market trend towards consuming technology as a service. It's a more agile approach, or supposedly a more agile approach, and it's certainly an approach that avoids the need for individual organizations to own and operate infrastructure. So hosted voice appears to align with the big trends in the technology market, and I think that's a big reason why it's becoming a very common topic of conversation. But the question we want to explore today is now the right time to buy it? So on the first two slides we're going to look at this morning, we're going to explore something which we call the Buying Behaviors Index, or the BBI. So this is something, it's an approach TNC uses to show what's really going on in the market. And crucially, what we're trying to show here is not what the vendors will tell you is happening in the market, or what they would like to be happening in the market, or what they'd like you to buy. What we're actually showing is what is really going on, what are organizations actually buying, and what services they're actually deploying. So it's a real world view of what's out there. Two key things to understand with the BBI is, first of all, is around the technologies and the maturity of them. So really technologies begin on the left of the BBI at their most immature, and as they mature, they move to the right and ultimately into retirement at the end of their life cycle. So the further to the right a technology is, the more ratified it is, and the more mature. At the same time, the technologies at the bottom are the least adopted, and they move up as they become more popular. So obviously a very popular, widely deployed technology would be towards the top right of the diagram. So as you can see, at the moment, TNC sees four main types of telephony in the market. So just quickly running through them, and Craig, if you can highlight them as I go. This is very sophisticated stuff this morning. So the PBX with ISDN and PSTN. So here we're talking about the most traditional form of telephony, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. Up at the top of the diagram, we see IP telephony with SIP. So this is really the next iteration, and this is where most of the market is today. So it's still typically a private solution. It's still typically got a large on-prem element to it, but it is an IP solution replacing ISDN with SIP and so on. Moving on, the next flavor, and a pretty mature solution, but as you can see, not a hugely adopted solution, is service provider hosted telephony. So this is where we're talking about a telephony solution hosted by typically a telecoms company, and it's really a multi-tenanted version of that IP telephony service. Hasn't really taken off so widely. It is deployed, but as you can see, it's towards the bottom of the BBI. And then further to the left, we see this cloud telephony, UCaaS, Unified Comms as a Service. So this is the solution really we're going to be talking about today. as you can see, it's currently less mature and less widely deployed in the market. And this is where we're seeing a hosted solution, typically from a non-telco vendor. So this is, this is buying directly from Microsoft or Google or somebody like that for a subscription-based, entirely cloud-based telephony service. So this is the market as we see it today. Traditional PBX model is moving towards retirement and is much less popular. It's largely being replaced with IP telephony with SIP, but still a private solution. Service provider hosted telephony fairly mature but not widely adopted. UCaaS in the market but at low levels of adoption and still going through its maturity cycle. So, Craig, can you talk us through the next slide and how we see the market developing from here?
Yeah, sure, John. So I think the key thing about the session today really is to look at the movement in some of these technologies in terms of both the technology life cycle, but what we're seeing from a buying behaviours perspective as well. So if we kind of follow the same order as John's just followed there in terms of looking at each of the different technologies, we'll start with PBX, with ISDN and PSTN. What we expect and anticipate to see and what we're actually seeing currently with many of our customers is a continuation of that technology declining. Partly driven by the fact that a lot of that technology will be getting decommissioned by telcos in the future, but also the fact that there's costs associated with that type of technology, maintaining that technology, and the limited functionality that technology brings no longer aligns to many organisational strategies. We don't see that disappearing altogether. There will still be a requirement for that type of technology in certain organisations that just require relatively basic functionality such as dial tone. But we do see that ultimately the penetration of that technology will significantly reduce over the next couple of years. Next, if we look at IP telephony and SIP, so we also see that effectively dropping down from a market penetration perspective, similarly for the same kind of reasons really, cost, capability, functionality. It's a very mature technology now. Most organisations have migrated from the PBXs to that platform, but they're now starting to look more around the more kind of unified communication space to deliver that similar basic functionality that they get with the IPT platform and SIP capability. From a service provider hosted telephony point of view, again, we see a slight decline in that. We do still think there is a need for that within the environment, and we still see customers requiring maybe some specific functionality from service providers such as contact center capabilities and maybe kind of PBX-centric type hosted capabilities. So we don't think that will disappear completely. We don't think that will be moved into a retirement phase anytime soon, but we do see the market penetration dropping slightly over the next couple of years. I think, as John said, the area that we really wanted to focus on today is around the cloud telephony and UCaaS piece. So we're already seeing this model mature significantly in the market at the minute, and we're already seeing take up from some of our bigger customers, both kind of UK-centric and in an international customers effectively starting to explore this technology in much more detail, starting to trial and pilot this type of technology. So what we expect over the coming years is, as this does move from a recognised technology into more of a ratified technology, the subscription models become more known, the stability and capability of the platforms become more known, we'll see more of a transition or transformation away from the standard PBX and IP telephony platforms into this cloud telephony type of capability.
So if I just ask you a question on that, Craig.
Sure.
Oh, don't go on there yet. I've still got it. There we go. Question for you. Why, we're talking about hosted telephony. There is a hosted telephony option on that BBI, the service provider hosted telephony option.
Yeah.
Why is that not taken off? What is it that the end user organizations don't like about that solution that you think they will like about the cloud hosted, the UCaaS type solution?
So there's a couple of things. You mentioned a specific point around the service provider hosted telephony. Generally is a hosted enterprise version of an IP telephony platform. So that could be a Cisco platform, an Avaya platform, a Mitel platform. So it delivers the same or very similar capabilities as to what an enterprise IP telephony solution would deliver. We are seeing the requirement to move more into that unified comm space, so integrating IM services, integrating collaboration services, integrating video type services. Now,
there's a functionality shortfall.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the service providers are developing UC functionality and capability, but the other issue is that it becomes quite sticky. With a service provider, it's generally tied into requiring WAN connectivity and a support wrap around the whole thing. So it makes it quite difficult to move away one single service tower from a service provider should you decide to do something different in another area, such as maybe the WAN or LAN infrastructure, for instance. The cloud stuff is your subscription based.
Right, okay, because I was going to say that's presumably something which the service providers find very attractive about it. Once you're on it, you can't get off it. Yeah, it's hard to do so. But end user organisations, they're going to look at that and say, actually, that's not too attractive to me, because I sort of always have the feeling talking to customers about this that, hey, this is a very fast moving market. We all know that, and particularly the UCaaS side of it. You know, Microsoft, Google, they're releasing new functionality every day. Yeah, as they develop the proposition. I don't want to be tied in for 5 years to my telecoms company in this very sticky service, because that's locking me out of innovation. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, pretty much so. We are seeing there is an interim step, I guess, that we are seeing some service providers offering, which is I guess they class it as a hybrid type solution, where some of the functionality is taken from the cloud, for instance, Microsoft Skype Business type services, but then some of the more core functionality, such as SIP breakout, is provisioned by the service provider. So people are taking kind of transitional steps to get to that full UCaaS model. But as we've talked about, as that model matures and some of them SIP capabilities and PSTN breakout capabilities get built into the UCaaS platforms, we fully suspect that people will, because of the agility and flexibility it brings within them platforms, move to that full UCaaS capable platform.
Okay, so to summarise for our listeners and try and sort of get some sort of key bullets out of this, the decline of those, I mean, the decline of PBX and ISDN is kind of obvious. It swims against everything that's going on in IT. It's on-prem, it's private, it's investment in infrastructure, and as we know, oftentimes it's pretty expensive and it's pretty low functionality. Got you? IP telephony with SIP, well, it's more of the same. It's probably a more cost-effective solution. SIP versus ISDN generally is an attractive commercial conversation, but otherwise it's got the same downsides: on-prem, investment in infrastructure, etc. Fine. The service provider hosted potentially offers some benefits. You don't necessarily own and operate infrastructure, but it's a long tie-in. It's pretty expensive. And again, it's got the functionality shortfall compared to UCaaS.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Excellent summary.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay. So next slide, you talk about the drivers for change. I guess we touched on some of those, but you just want to take us through, what it is that is making organisations look at this new sort of these new functionalities and new solutions.
Yeah, so I think we'll pick out a couple of these, and we've already talked about a couple. I think the top one's quite an important one, so strategy alignment. So many organisations that we work with and talk with now are trying to pursue either a cloud first or an agile working type strategy, or even both of them things. What that generally means is, you've already mentioned it, they don't particularly want to own and operate infrastructure. Moving to that subscription-based platform in the future allows them to have much more flexibility around the deployment. They can ramp up and ramp down services as and when required. It allows them to be much more agile in terms of their working policies. They don't need to be tied to a desk. The kind of UC capability that comes about that platforms can be delivered anywhere to any device. and that kind of drives into the increased functionality and kind of service flexibility management agility points there as well. There is a potential driver around reducing cost, so consolidating some of the services, moving away from fixed infrastructure and the support costs associated with them. We will talk about that again in a second in terms of one of the challenges, but it is one of the drivers that many organisations approach us to talk about, particularly on UCaaS. I think that the fifth point there is a particularly interesting point, and one of the things that we see this being brought onto the agenda for, generally some kind of trigger event. So many customers who we spoke about this in the past have had some kind of trigger event, such as a head office relocation or an agile workplace strategy that they're trying to deliver. So it drives a requirement to look at that type of technology, which historically, is quite stable. It does what it does, and it's not really an area where businesses are saying, "Oh, let's replace our telephony because it's got a great ROI," for instance.
So I'm delighted you raised that, because we've talked a lot about sort of why UCaaS has got really high up the agenda, why a lot of people are talking about it. What I think, and clearly the drivers for change, they're powerful drivers there. So if we just skip on to the next slide, I guess the question our listeners may be asking themselves, or hopefully us, as we're doing the talking at the moment, is, okay, with so many drivers, why, I better get on the phone to someone right now and buy this service, right? Well, yeah. I know, because we've already talked about this webinar, the answer is, well, not quite so simple. So why is adoption so low when drivers are so strong?
So back to that first slide when we talked about today and the maturity of some of this technology, it is a recognised technology now, but it's still not a fully ratified, I guess fit for purpose for everybody type of technology. The way you access it, the way it operates, the performance of it, the reliability of that type of platform differs, and it's definitely different from a traditional PBX or IPT type solution, because it's moving to shared infrastructure, it's moving to potentially internet-based access services to get to get the dial tone, the video and UC type services. So it's always at this point in time driven by kind of best endeavours type of reliability. So that's one of the big challenges that the big players in this space are trying to overcome. They're trying to improve codecs, trying to improve the way people can access these things, trying to improve security around it. But there's lots of things that still need to be matured before it becomes a fully ratified technology, before the market penetration will increase. Similarly with the feature sets, so one of the biggest challenges that we come across in this market when people have considered moving to UCaaS or have moved to UCaaS is things like contact centres. You can run a high capacity contact centre on a UCaaS platform as it stands today, primarily for the reasons I've just said, the reliability, the performance issues. It's just not there yet to be able to do that. One of the things which is really important as well is price, especially when considering a TCO. So it looks attractive over a year, over 2 years, maybe even over 3 years. But as you start looking at maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 year TCO of the OPEX costs associated with these subscription-based services in comparison to traditional IPT and SIP type solutions or on-prem solutions, it becomes potentially quite expensive.
It's a really, really interesting point, because one of the things I see, we write a lot of business cases, right? That's one of the things we spend a lot of our lives doing at TNC. Yeah. A lot of business cases for UCaaS fail at the moment, right? That organizations look at the commercial position and say, actually, this isn't attractive. And when you think about it, you can see why. That you've got a telephony cost, which very often is largely sunk. The PBXs, the handsets, those costs have, long since been paid for. What you're looking at now is some line rental and some call costs. Well, call costs are going to be, you're still going to have in the UCaaS environment. So effectively, the conversation is really, well, buying a whole load of per seat costs, is that more expensive than renting some SIP infrastructure? And very often that's the case. Am I being oversimplifying? Sorry, am I oversimplifying it?
No, absolutely not. So I think another point to that is potentially you lose a little bit of commercial leverage as well, because of it being, many of these services are subscription-based services, similar to the kind of models that we see in the cloud environment with maybe Azure and AWS, where it's all fairly standard pricing. You don't have much leverage over being able to negotiate better pence per minute rates and cost per user rates. It's pretty much standardized as what it is. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You can lose some commercial leverage. The cost of the service over time, potentially, if you add more functionality, becomes quite expensive as well. So the business case is often very difficult to stack up in comparison to a like-for-like on-premise or enterprise type solution.
I think the other thing that's worth bearing in mind, and again, this will differ for different types of, think about people listening and the wider organizations out there. A lot of organizations like the opportunity to capitalize a whole ton of, and I mean, we see this more widely in cloud, right?
Yeah.
A lot of organizations are used to capitalizing things and then having a low OpEx.
Yes.
That opportunity doesn't present itself in UCaaS. You can't capitalize, a slice of a Microsoft data center and then, just pay for your call costs thereafter. Everything moves to an OpEx. That might, very often not suit.
Yeah, and it's an OpEx that needs to be continually managed as well. Again, similar to what we see within the cloud space. By providing a service that delivers flexibility and agility, unless somebody's managing that flexibility and agility, then you can potentially, be spending money on things that you don't require. So yeah, that is again a very interesting point. I think the last quick one on this slide really is around vendor choice. So there are a number of UCaaS providers out there, Microsoft being probably the biggest one, and they are taking up the greatest market share, but it is limited, and the maturity of even Microsoft is still just not quite there yet. So it's limited in terms of who you can go and speak to for some of this stuff, particularly as you start moving out of maybe the UK domestic markets into international. You start coming across lots of regulatory problems as well around PSTN breakout and capability to deliver some of these features. So I think to summarise kind of the challenges, it is a maturing market. We do expect that the take-up will increase over the coming years, but I think for some organisations it may not fit. Some organisations that need simple telephony may still be best sticking with IPT and kind of traditional type services, or even service provider services. But for some organisations who do have, the cloud-first strategies, the agile working strategies, it's definitely something that should start to be considered and understand what the options are like from a strategic perspective.
Craig, you've stolen my thunder. I was about to go on to my conclusion slide and wrap it all up. So yeah, so conscious we've gone past our 20 minutes. So yeah, I think there's some, you summarised it very nicely. I don't think there's any secret which direction the market is going, not least because like all networks and telephony are mirroring the wider IT strategy. It's movement away from on-prem owned and operated infrastructure towards as a service type solutions. The challenge though is really the functionality and reliability in UCaaS services isn't there at the moment for the needs of most organizations, and the business case isn't quite there because very often you're moving from what is actually a fairly low cost infrastructure these days, PBX maintenance, so paying for some SIP trunks and paying for some calls is pretty cheap, and you're potentially crystallizing a lot of those costs into per seat costs and subscription costs moving forward. So at the moment, the functionality argument isn't necessarily there, and the business case argument isn't necessarily there. For that reason, typically we're seeing companies migrating when they've got a catalyst type event. So moving to a new head office, is a very common one. For those other organizations, probably it's a hybrid voice environment for now, mixing some service provider hosted, potentially mixing in some UCaaS for certain user types, probably including also some of their own IP on-prem type solutions. So, you know, is now the right time to buy? Well, possibly, more likely not. But it is a when, not if. And we think, you know, as we keep looking at this and talking about it over the next 12, 24, 36 months, we are going to see more functional solutions coming to the market. The commercials at some point will get fixed. And, you know, we do think we'll see greater adoption. So, 5 minutes over. So thank you all for listening, for bearing with us. Hopefully that was an interesting run through the market. Craig, thank you as always for your insights.
Thank you, John.
And thank you all for listening. And we look forward to talking with you again on our next webinar.